usually I would use, this is a San Mai billet, so we've got very high carbon steel in the middle. We've got unusually wide cladding on this one because it's a bit different. I thought we'd do something a bit special today. So this is a sort of a low layer, 40 odd layer of iron and this core steel, so it's a very pure carbon steel layered up with wrought iron. And because it's a kind of low carbon tamahange-ish looking material, hopefully, I want a bit more of the cladding showing, and I think we'll get away with it. So we've got more proportion of cladding to core steel, and the core steel is like a pure carbon steel. So it's just got to soak in, it's not paraffin, it's kerosene, similar. It's like chemical free, isn't it, I think? And that's all I need rather than flux. So should we put it in the fire?
Let's go.
Yeah, let's do it. So straight in a hot fire. I'll pump up the jam on that, because I have plenty of. Straight in a hot fire. Pretty carburizing environment. That billet's just going to build a sort of hydrocarbon barrier to protect itself, and that's what the kerosene does. And then we just let it build. That's a bit like a scale that forms, and it sort of protects it for that very first weld. So we'll get it to visually the right temperature. You've got no flux as a guide. You know, in simplicity, we're heating it up to a welding heat. The surfaces are going to become slightly molten, and once we squeeze them together in the hydraulic press, those surfaces interact with each other. That's effectively what we're doing. Put the door on. You want to get some, sort of goes a bit dark, and then as it gets red, it starts to form that scaly barrier. Keeping it fairly carburizing that flame. See the red bits coming off there? That's indicates a carburizing flame, so they're proportionally more fuel than air. A bit like running a engine ridge. So about 10 minutes and it'll be up to temperature, and I'll let it soak in, make sure the colour's gone right into the centre of the billet, and there's no flux, as I say, for this part of my process. So you're just going off the even colour and temperature of the metal. A nice yellow heat. I think, I mean, I've only got very unreliable ways. I've got a heat gun that I'm not very confident in it anymore. I'd say about 1100 degrees, and that's all it needs. Yeah, I'm going off the colour. I can do it even with stainless. I can go off colour now, so it's like a very bright yellow for stainless, and you can get away with a lot less in carbon steel, especially as I'm using iron, wrought iron, pure carbon steel, no alloy. You know, you can get away with a lower temperature. At this stage you can see pretty things in the metal. See the edges just warming up now, and I can see all the strands of the cladding. It was a sandwich, like a San Mai of wrought and core material, and I decided not to use it as San Mai because the cladding looked a bit thin. So I've stacked it up into a sort of low layer Damascus, and because it was just wrought iron and a pure carbon steel, the main goal wasn't to make a lot of layers, but to even out the carbon. Sort of the opposite of San Mai, where you're trying to weld it up and keep as much of the carbon in the middle as possible. It was like the opposite, so I wanted to make a uniform cladding, so I was giving it long soaks and letting all the carbon move through the material. I mean, at San Mai, ideally you want to get it to welding heat, get it forged out, and minimise that carbon diffusion from the core. You could use nickel and that would stop it, and in fact, but I only find that necessary with stainless. Stainless needs a bit more heat, a bit more time, and it seems to suck up more carbon, so I put a barrier of nickel in there. Nickel's very expensive.
Is it nickel just for decorative purposes, or?
No, it acts as a carbon barrier, so it keeps all the, I mean, you could use quite a thick bit of nickel, but it looks really like a big fat bit of nickel in there, but I'd rather sort of, you almost didn't see it, so I'm just using the thinnest, or start very thick, and then it ends up being very thin, so it's just acting as a carbon barrier. So this upside down forge arrangement, I only use it for welding. I prefer it because the gas is coming in down there and it's moving around the billet. You've got the massive advantage for this specific process of forming like a scale barrier. There's no flaw, so you won't damage the barrier that it's formed on the floor. So if you had a flaw, you couldn't really turn it, you'd have to just put it in there and leave it, otherwise you might break that sort of scaly, hard shell. I think it's called a hydrocarbon shell. I couldn't tell you the chemistry, but that's what it is.
Changes colour quite well.
It is, yeah. Yeah, the edges are very nearly at the right temperature. I mean, I think in these materials you can get away with a bright orange, you know. The grain's getting very large through this process. It has to be repaired after you've welded it. The grain's like massive after this process, and then you have to heat cycle it to repair the grain. I made sure to get a spare bottle of gas. It'd be awful to run out of gas in the middle of this day. I did basically to look a bit prettier, this. So normally, my normal standard go-to material these days is pure iron, which is not steel, it's iron. There's no carbon in it. And it's very uniform, just a very well made, like made small batches. So, I mean, steel's rolled, you know, mainly in China these days, tons at a time, can have faults in it. It's got gackier and gackier over the years. And I know because I've done tons of railings and it splits on you and you think this is a new material, you know what I mean? And you're hot punching it and it reveals all the rolling flaws and stuff like that. So it's become less and less perfect. And iron is small batch. If you're, you know, making very high-end chef knives, so you want the cladding to be as nice as everything else. So obviously I've got a lovely core steel. This particular core steel is from the 1980s, believe it or not, and it's basically a W1, classified as a W1 or C105. Metallurgist, he's a really nutty bladesmith and like a bit of a hippie. He's a great guy, and he also, as I say, is a metallurgist who happens to have access to Lohmann rolling mill. So if you've got enough bucks, you could say to Akim, "Oh, can we make a little steel just for me, like, you know, just a few like 8 tons of steel maybe." So he's a great guy to talk to, but this is one that he didn't design. It's popped up in whatever sales things he has access to, and he's managed to buy 10 tons of this incredible pure. He makes super clean steels, and it's cleaner than the super clean steels he makes in his own words. So it means it's super tough, which for my purposes, it has this incredible inherent toughness, and that means that I can make it even harder. Do you see what I mean? So I can use it even harder because I'm not really after the toughness, but I can use that to make it harder. So it's a lovely steel, lovely, lovely steel. It's had a nice soak. We'll just let that other side, you see that other side's slightly darker. Just needed a turn, so I'll give it one turn and then we're about there. So this is the final weld there. So we don't want to, well, they're not, there's no diffusion happening at the moment because they're not together. So if you're going to give it a soak, this is the time to give it a soak rather than after. I won't do a long soak. When we're drawing it out, I'll just try and quickly and effectively draw it out without fucking it up. And you can't really see it's like a fuzzy, it's almost like it's flux, like there's a slightly molten coating to it, and that's like the hydrocarbon scaly, hard jacket. But when I dink it in the press, you'll see it's like an extra thick scale that just kind of falls off it as soon as you... So it's literally a jacket that serves its purpose and then falls away on that very first weld. So that's why I prefer to do it in the press, and I do the whole billet, done. As opposed to the hammer where, you know, you take one bite and then the other side of it is exposed for a few seconds even.
Fire with a wistful expression.
Okay, buddy. That. You see that jacket just comes away very clean under there. And I use flux now from now. That's the first time I've used flux. It's quite nice to have a salt shaker for this bit because it burns your hands. But that is fluxed enough. Lovely, back in the fire. It's quite a big chunk actually, plenty of material. So probably that'll make, I reckon you might get 3 lengths of that out of it. So I reckon 10 knives out of that. But it's largely variable because I might want to do like one really thick, heavy slicing machine, you know, and that'll take up a lot more material than like these super thin forged, you know, you got a thick bit there, but you know, the rest of it's about 1 mil thick. Get quite a few out of that, probably 4 or 5 knives out of that with those, but if you do a big heavy one, then you're going to use a great big bit. Nice to have that familiar security of flux, and you can see it bubbling away when it's at the right temperature. Cladding, the lower carbon areas take longer to start bubbling than the high carbon areas. It's a very good indicator. That's why it's a good place to start welding with flux. That's pretty nice. It can feel when it's all really nice. Yeah, it's going to be good. Going to be good, mate. Lovely. So the next one, I mean, I drew out a fair bit there as well because I could feel it was fine. That first weld, it was done basically. So I drew out a good amount, but this go, I'm going to draw it out as long, get as much of the drawing out as I can done basically, and hopefully that'll be the last where it's anything like a welding heat. Look, it's there already. See the sort of honey, can you capture like the flux on the core? It's like sort of molten honey, and that's it's there already. Because the forge has been running quite a while, gets really effective once the forge is perfectly up to temperature, and the billet holds a lot of that. I could have probably drawn that out a lot more, but better safe than sorry.
I hope you're enjoying the video so far, and if you are, then you need to know about our sponsors who made this video possible. We have MULTITOOL products who do the 84 engine and belt grinders, CLARKE knives who are a 3-generation family-run business who offer stock removal Damascus billets, but also offer professional heat treatment service for all types of knives. And GFS Knife Supplies. They are a one-stop shop for all your knife making consumables. GFS is a small family-run business and some of the quickest deliveries for your knife knife making needs, including but not limited to handle material, wood G10 liners and pins, the rock blade heat kilns, quenching oil for hardening knives, abrasive belts that can cut through hardened steel, and of course the steel stock that you use for making knives. Have a look at the brand new things that these guys have to offer by clicking the links in the description, and at the same time it's a little thank you to them for sponsoring this videos.
Gonna pause and sort that bar out. It's getting on my nerves. Give it a little dink in the press. Straighten that bar out. Getting on my nerves.
If you want to know when the next video is out, like, subscribe and make sure you've clicked the bell notification. I appreciate your support.